Now that we know our parent functions and our general one period that we need to graph, let's start to take a look at some stretching and shrinking. Let's first take a look at vertical stretching and shrinking. And here, our amplitude is that A value in front, so that is 4. The period, there's no changing here, so it's just an x. That means our period is still 2 pi. So from the previous video, you want to start at 2 pi, count out 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Here is 2 pi, half of 2 pi is pi, half of pi is pi over 2, and this one is 3 pi over 2. Our amplitude is 4, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. Our sine always starts at what we're going to call the midline, or in this case, it starts at 0. Sine starts at 0, and then later on we'll know what the midline means, okay, or midline. So just, at this case, our midline is 0. So it starts at 0. Then our next value is 4. It's stretched by 4, so that means it goes up to 4 at the top. Then it goes back down to 0. Then at 3 pi over 2, we're at negative 4. It's stretched to negative 4. Then at 2 pi, we are back at 0. So here is a graph of 4 sine of x. Our transformation is a vertical stretch by 4. Next one, we have an amplitude of 1/4. The period is still the same. The period is 2 pi. So in this case, I'm going to change this, right? I'm not going to do 1 here and then a 1/4. So instead, I'm going to have 1 up top, and then this will be 1/4, 1/2, and so on. So this one will be negative 1/4. I need to do my period. So it starts at 2 pi, 4 out. Half of 2 pi is pi. This is pi over 2. Therefore, this is 3 pi over 2. Sine again starts at 0. Then it goes up to 1 over 4. Then it goes down to pi, to 0 at pi. Then it's at negative 1/4 at 3 pi over 2. And then at 2 pi, we are back at 0. So here is the curve. Make sure it's a smooth curve. I don't want to see zigzags like this. That's not what a sine curve looks like. So it needs to be smooth. The transformation is a vertical shrink by 1/4. You could graph the parent functions. So if you take a look at this first example, number 1, we know that it would be at 0, 1, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. So this is the parent function. Yellow is just y equals sine of x, or you can say that's your g of x. Notice that it's much more smaller, right? So you can see how the sine curve, the purple, is very stretched. And then vice versa. If you go to here and say y equals sine of x, and we go all the way to 1, to pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi, notice that the purple one is definitely shrunk. Okay, it's a lot more smaller. If you could, if we were all to scale, we would see it a little bit better. It's just that we scaled our graphs, but I just want you to see it in comparison to each. So go ahead and try B and C on your own, and then just pause the video, and then I will have the answers here once you are done. Here are the graphs for B and C. So again, these are the bare minimum points you need to label. I don't want to just see the curve drawn on there without the labeling of the period. So you must label the periods. You must label the amplitude so I can see it very, very clearly. So let's graph cosine, vertical stretch, and shrink. It's very, very similar, but just your starting point's different. So our amplitude is a half, the period is 2 pi. So we're just focusing on one aspect of our graph. We know that it's a vertical shrink by a half, and the period is 2 pi. So label all your pieces here. It's a shrink of a half. So we have 1 and negative 1. Here is a half. This is negative a half. Now cosine, thinking about the graph of cosine, remember that cosine at that 0 value, 0 radians, x is 1. So we're going to start at 1. Then it goes down to pi over 2 at 0. At pi over 2, it's at 0. Then at pi, we're at -1. 3 pi over 2, we're at 0 again. And then at 2 pi, we're back at 1. So this is how, oops, of course you should shrink it. So in this case, we have to go to a half. So that would be the parent function. And then graphing the 1/2, you would only go to the 1/2. Okay, so the first one was the parent function of cosine. Here is actually the 1/2 cosine x. So let's take a look at stretching it. So amplitude is 2, period is 2 pi. It's a vertical stretch of 2. And actually, you can go ahead and finish this one. Try finishing this one as well as for cosine x here in your notebook. And then when you come back, the answers will be here. So here are the graphs of 2 cosine of x as well as 4 cosine of x. Again, make sure labeling the 4 points on the x-axis as well as your maximum and minimum point on the y-axis of your graphs.